Good evening and welcome to the last of our spring UEA London Lectures, Science Not Just for Scientists. My name is Fiona Lettis and I'm Pro Vice-Chancellor for Research and Innovation here at UEA. I'm very excited to tell you that this evening we're filming live from Lecture Theatre 1 on UEA campus in Norwich, together with Professor Ben Garrod. It's wonderful to be here because, like most of us, I haven't spent as much time on our beautiful campus as I'd have liked in the last year. So to address that, Ben will be giving his lecture while walking around the UEA campus, accompanied by our intrepid film crew. And we'll be travelling with him via the medium of YouTube, taking in iconic campus vistas and stopping to view some of our unique buildings. Now, we had a rehearsal yesterday and it turns out that UEA is a pretty big place, so Ben won't be able to make it to every single corner of the campus, but we hope you'll enjoy the route that we have planned. Please do share your memories and favourite campus spots in the YouTube chat, and we'll do our best to visit them. Now, a bit more information about our speaker this evening. Many of you will know Ben from his appearances on television, shows such as Baby Chimp Rescue, Springwatch, The Secrets of Bones, and The Secrets of Skin. Those of us at UEA also know Ben as Professor of Evolutionary Biology and Science Engagement, a position that he's held for the past 3 years. Since joining UEA, Ben has thrown himself into activities for our students and local community, including talks on the art of science communication for our undergraduates, the Norwich Science Festival family talks, and he's even live-streamed animal dissections. But this is Ben's first lecture for the UEA London Lecture series. Ben is a local lad. He was born in Great Yarmouth and attended East Norfolk Sixth Form College. He graduated from Anglia Ruskin University with a Bachelor of Science in Animal Behaviour, and he went on to University College London and the Zoological Society of London to complete his doctorate on the evolution of monkeys, entitled Primates of the Caribbean. Ben's research and professional life has taken him all over the world, from leading a field site for chimpanzee conservation with the Jane Goodall Institute in Uganda to studying marine life in Madagascar. But for this evening, Ben is here to explore the UEA campus. So, take it away, Ben.
That was a great introduction, and what comes through for me is I'm a scientist. I'm a scientist through and through. Cut me in half, you just see scientist wherever you look. And I've kind of wanted to be a scientist ever since I was tiny. In fact, I wanted to be a scientist before I really knew what it meant to be a scientist. As Fiona said, I grew up in Norfolk and spent a lot of time in my very early childhood with my grandparents on the beaches exploring. And we would find things on a daily basis. We would find these wonderful little egg cases from sharks. We would find cuttlefish bones and all different types of seaweed. But my grandparents were not scientists, so I didn't really get the answers I wanted. I kept saying, what's this? Where's it from? And they didn't really know. So instead, they made up these wonderful, often fantastic and not always truthful stories. And providing that narrative with this sense of wonder of the scientific world really inspired me to look around me. And I think that's what we are as scientists. We're these grown-up, geeky kids in adult bodies who still ask those wonderful questions: how, why, what, where, when. And I think that's something that unites us as a scientific community. Now, as Fiona said there, I have been lucky enough to work all around the world with some iconic, wonderful species, everything from, as she said, marine life in Madagascar and chimpanzees in Africa, right through to polar bears in the Arctic, and even dinosaur remains across South America. Being a scientist is absolutely crucial to my sense of being. I absolutely, as I said before, have always wanted to be a scientist. I spoke to my mum and dad last night. I'm staying with them for the first time in nearly a year now. And we were talking about when I was much younger and what I wanted to do when I was a kid. And I never knew this, but I was told last night that on my one of my very important parents' evenings whilst at school, my mum, my dad came back. They were very happy that I'd got good grades. I was only about this height, about 8 or 9 years old, I guess. And my grades were great. My teacher came back and said, well, Ben will either become a journalist or a serial killer. Actual words from my teacher to my parents when I was about 9 years old. Well, didn't become a journalist. And for me, I guess, being a biologist is a legitimate alternative anyway. I was the first in my family to go to university. and the first actually to go to college. I'm first generation academic, and like many people listening, we don't have scientific backgrounds, and science is daunting. So for me, it's really important that we have the opportunity to spread that science and to really showcase what science is all about, showcasing that it's not just pale, male and stale. I mean, I'm a couple of those at least, but to get science and to enable it to encompass the complete spectrum of everything we include within science, within the whole universe, we need to be a bit more diverse about that. Because of this, I do a lot of engagement, a lot of outreach, as you heard earlier, and it's really important that we try and enable everyone to feel they have a place within science. I worked with a friend a few years ago who's a teacher in Norfolk and worked with a bunch of kids. It was amazing. And as part of this, we did a little experiment where we asked the kids to draw what it meant to be a scientist. And a whole class of kids, unfortunately here, every single one drew a man in a lab coat. It was heartbreaking. It really was. Because that's not what scientists are. Maybe a very, very small fraction of us maybe, but as you imagine, there's a lot more than that. Now, within the UK in 2019, research showed that 15% of the British public got their science from Facebook alone. And actually, about 30%, so about a third of the British population, when they heard the word science, their only engagement was at school. Anything after school, science disappeared. It ceased to exist. And while 51% in 2019 were confident with regards to science, only 15% of the British population trusted in science. And sadly, even a smaller percentage trusted scientists. And you think, so what? Who really cares if you don't trust science or scientists? And actually, that didn't really matter, I guess, a few years ago to most of the population around the world. And then something obviously fundamentally changed for us all, the pandemic. And really quickly, we saw a massive change, a massive tectonic shift in our reliance on science and our need to engage with science more. And right from the start, UEA was there. We stepped up and our staff, our students, and everyone else across the board got involved. And one of those very, very early on was Professor Paul Hunter from our medical school. Now, it seems unbelievable now that we're discussing this, but Paul was one of the first to really bang home about how important the role of masks are. Something as fundamentally part of our lives now as masks. He was one to propose very early on, yes, they make a massive difference. He also looked at the role of closing schools early on in terms of restricting the spread of disease, and was instrumental in doing research that looked at the impact of poor governance in terms of communication and weak messages from central governments. Paul was also absolutely brilliant and has remained to do so, both interpreting his research and others also. When we look at a university such as UEA, or I guess anywhere, we assume that we will be doing research here. We will be doing the science, but it's more than that. And UEA has so many connections with others doing science and pushing it to a wider audience. Because as the pandemic is showing, science isn't insular. It doesn't exist within this little bubble. This idea of the ivory tower is outdated. It's wrong. So many of the community, so much of the community we have here at UEA is involved with engaging science, both individuals, groups, and much larger organisations. One of the individuals that inspires me most at UEA, who has done an incredible job in the last few months alone, is Dr. Noelia Falcon. Now, she's in pharmacy, she's a senior research associate, and she did her PhD looking at tissue engineering. But No did a lot more than that. She went further and actually developed a podcast called I Belong Here, because she firmly believes that science isn't just for scientists and we need to diversify and expand what we do within science. So she's got this wonderful podcast where she highlights the role of women and girls within STEM, so science, technology, engineering, maths and medicine. And you think, well, it's one person doing one podcast. But actually, in the last 12 months in Germany, for example, one of the most downloaded podcasts was by a lone epidemiologist talking about science. So the role of one person within the community can have a massive impact. Another group doing a huge amount of work is the Youth STEM Awards. So again, STEM standing for Science, Technology, Engineering, Maths and Medicine. And it was set up by two of our our graduates. They graduated a few years ago now, I'm sure they wouldn't mind me saying, very good friends of mine, Sam and Simon. Now, I probably shouldn't describe it as this, but it's the geeky version of the Duke of Edinburgh Awards. If I was a kid growing up now, I would have loved to have done this, and I'm one of their ambassadors now. It was set up just a few years ago, and already 60 schools and colleges from across the region have been involved, and 17,000 activities have been logged by young people to get involved with science. It inspires them and enables them to get a real taster of what these subjects are like, and gives them this hope and this sense of capability that they can actually get involved with STEM and any of these careers themselves. And obviously within their remit, they're targeting groups and areas that wouldn't traditionally feel comfortable getting into science. And again, that's with a strong partnership with UEA here. Another one which I'm very, very passionately attached to is the Norwich Science Festival. I'm very fortunately patron of Norwich Science Festival, and they've popped up over the UK in the last few years. This is the 6th year that we've had Norwich Science Festival, and it's grown massively. So in 2019, obviously last year was a bit of an exception, so it was all virtual last year. In 2019, we had, over a 10-day period, about 140,000 visits from members of the public. And so to get that many people in our local area engaged with science is incredible. We've had everything from Dr. Jane Goodall in the cathedral talking about her life, Chris Packham doing the same. We've had live-streamed animal dissections, including alligators and ostriches, and we've even had animal sex quizzes. Why wouldn't you? Really nicely, within that, we've had about 25% of the talks and activities that we do at the Norwich Science Festival have been done with a very strong partnership at UEA. And in 2019, about 350 of the staff and students from UEA and the Norwich Research Park were actively involved in the festival itself. And that really shows that there's a real desire for scientists and science students to get out and have a really good look. Now, an area that's in the news a lot at the moment is making science, making university, making education accessible to all. And it's something we are striving for at UEA. In fact, our very own Vice-Chancellor, Professor David Richardson, has said that while he believes universities do have a role in perpetuating institutionalised racism, it's a hard thing to face up to and to accept. But until we look at the problem in the face in that way, we've got no chance of addressing it. So there's a whole suite of projects, programmes aimed to both decolonise the curriculum and also improve the opportunities for everybody to get into science. Because as I said, science encompasses everything. From the moment the universe was created to the reason your dog wags her tail when she sees you in the morning, it's science. Nothing we do is without science. So why not allow everyone that opportunity? And yes, there's always more work to be done, but that's something that we are really pushing for and has really started, hopefully, to move in the right direction. Now, haven't been talking too much about where we are right now, but you've seen that I say wonderful. It's quite brutal and quite stark. The spine, the spinal column of the university here, the Lasden building. Like it or loathe it, there's a lot of amazing work going on there, and we're moving so that we can see the ziggurats here, these unique, completely unique accommodation blocks. However, what I love, one of the things I love most, isn't the architecture behind me necessarily, it's this juxtaposition between that architecture and this wonderful, beautiful outdoor space we have here. Norfolk's a very rural community, very dynamic in many ways, but it's still very rural, and we have this wonderful wild campus. Now, there are lots of academics working on ecology and biodiversity here, but one of note is Dr. Ian Barr, who does a huge amount of work here and is instrumental in ascertaining that there are about 5,500 species on our campus here. Now, while Ian is one of our academics, it's not only the academics doing incredible work with biology, for example, here. I think very quickly we fall into that trap where we assume scientists are doing the science, but very often it's the students as well. And UEA has pushed the bar with that one as well, I feel. So very recently, and in fact it's so recent that we haven't actually had this published yet, so this is hot off the press, and in many ways probably shouldn't be telling you this, but We have a student, an undergraduate student here, called Ivana Murphy, who, based in bio with her supervisor, Professor Diana Bell, was able to identify, along with colleagues at the Zoological Society of London, such as Professor Andrew Cunningham, that, and this will sound relatively scary, but there is a new novel strain of coronavirus in bats found in the UK. However, this is likely to be a coronavirus strain that's been evolving and sitting alongside these bats for millennia, potentially. But it's amazing that our students, our undergraduate students, are doing work, are doing research, and are coming up with these incredible findings that are completely changing the way we look at the natural world. And what more can we look at than the role of biodiversity with these reservoirs of disease right now? In a time where all we're talking about is coronavirus, our own students are doing a huge amount of work that has huge potential there. Now, in the last 12 months, of course, things have slowed down in many ways. But the research and engagement and results and discovery really hasn't here. So 3 areas that I think are absolutely fascinating that have been worked on quite extensively in the last few months within UEA are smell, sleep, and pain. Now, I don't have a sense of smell. I lost it when I was a kid, quite bizarrely. It's one of my weird superpowers, I guess, in reverse. It's not the sort of thing you'd want as an Avenger, and I'll come back to that in a second. But one of my weird superpowers is a lack of smell. But as many of us know, one of the side effects or one of the symptoms of coronavirus has been a loss of smell. And Professor Carl Philpott at the university has looked at the potential to treat anosmia, or the lack of smell, in a new, novel fashion. Traditionally, it was through treatment of corticosteroids, which he and his team have discovered probably isn't the best way to deal with this. And instead, they're looking at olfactory training. So retraining the nose, retraining the brain to learn how to smell again. Another one is, it links into something that a friend of mine is doing. I've got a strange bunch of friends, and one of which from the local area, Mark Thompson, honorary graduate from UEA. He's a broadcaster and an astronomer. And like many of us, he likes lecturing. Now, you might think you've been in a lecture that never seems to end. I hope none of you are feeling that right now. But Mark wants to go a little bit further. He wants to break a record. And Mark is attempting, towards the end of the year, to do a 6-day-long lecture. You think this is bad? It'll be an amazing opportunity and an amazing achievement, so please log in later on in the year. But importantly, there are risks associated with this. So Mark is working closely with the sleep research team here. And something they've discovered over the last few months is that the sooner you engage with sleep-based problems in people, the better the chances are identifying and hopefully reducing dementia later on in life. There's a huge link there. The other area is pain. Unfortunately, about 50% of the British population suffer with chronic pain disorders. I had pain for a long time. I had neck damage, and I tried everything. I tried acupuncture. I tried nerve blocks. I even tried to find my inner chi. Apparently, I don't have one. But I would have tried anything to alleviate the problems I had. Researchers here at UEA are doing something amazing yet again. They're looking at the role of VR, so virtual reality. And through audio-visual stimulation, they believe it might be a new, novel and effective way of dealing with chronic pain. Now, I've walked very delicately around a certain area there, because although we have this wonderful wild site that looks completely wild and tangled, it's managed beautifully. And we have some wonderful and rare species here, one of which is the five-barred or banded wasp. Very unusual, very special little wasp. And that reminds me, we've also had research here by Ryan Brock. Ryan Brock from Bio and colleagues at UCL, including Seri and Sumner, who have identified that wasps, rather than just being aggressive, aggy little stripy buggers that ruin your picnics, are actually really iconic and important predators in an agricultural setting. So even we look at things from the role of chronic pain to what's the point of a wasp? And again, it highlights the collaborative research that's going on across UEA. Now, I mentioned earlier that if I had a superpower, it would be not to smell stuff. It's a pretty crap superpower, I admit. And I probably wouldn't make it into the Avengers team. However, One part of UEA that did is this iconic building we're now coming up to. I mean, other people might know it as the Sainsbury Center, but it did appear in a certain franchise a couple of years ago. Now, for those of you who are history buffs and slightly more cultured than I am, the Sainsbury Center was opened here in 1978 by Lord Norman Foster. And if the building looks a little bit familiar, it's the same gentleman who designed the iconic building Stansted Airport. This was his first public building, however. So built in 1978, I'm guessing, or I'm hoping, most of you who are watching this evening, since graduating, this was here during your time. If not, you graduated a long time ago, so congratulations. This now houses, as well as an absolute stellar restaurant and cafe, a world-class art collection. It's absolutely second to none, and to have that on site here is a huge gem, a huge star in our crown, I think, in many ways. But it does link me to a story that I had with, I'm going to name drop a little bit, because I think I should, I think I've earned this so far, Sir David Attenborough. One of the last times I was here, I was sent on a secret mission. I was sent to take a photo of a piece of carved stone. It's an amazing, it looks like a multifaceted hand axe, but it has thousands of tiny cuts and nooks chipped in to make this beautiful piece. And David wanted a photo. We were filming together on a secret project that I can't tell you too much about just yet. But this links me to an idea or a memory that I had with Sir David. We were working together back in 2016. We were in Argentina. We were filming for BBC One this iconic, incredible paleontological discovery. It was an animal called Patago Titan, and it would have absolutely wiped the floor with Dipley the Diplodocus. It was maybe not longer, but much, much heavier, maybe up to 76 tons in weight. So very fortunately, I got to spend time with a paleontological heavyweight and also Sir David. We were filming in this incredible museum with these wonderful discoveries. And as we were there, David, myself, the paleontologist in charge, Diego Pol, we were not filming for a little while, and we stood, the three of us, talking. And there were families everywhere, all running around. And out of nowhere, a group of Argentinian kids with their parents pointed and said in hushed, reverent tones, there he is, look, there he is, and ran over to get their signature, to get their autograph. Not from me, absolutely not from me. And not from David. They ran straight past David in his iconic blue and beige chinos and ran straight to Diego, the scientist doing the work. They were enthused, they loved it. It was such a wonderful thing. And David turned around to me and said, that's how it should be. People should be that excited to see scientists. We have, as I said, a wonderful set of buildings here, but it's more than that. There's a lot of wonderful people involved as well. And so far, we've walked around and we've seen where the students stay, where you used to stay. We've seen the library, where you used to, we're going to move because there's a car coming. We're doing a live lecture. We've also seen where you used to study, in the library, and I hope you spent a lot of time in the library. And we've also seen the iconic, wonderful Union. And I know you spent a lot of time in the Union as well. Now, we're going to move around a little bit because there's a whole pile of cars that don't seem to know what to do right now. So we're going to carry on going. And I'm hoping that as you see the different parts of the building, the different parts of the campus, a lot of it is familiar. Because a lot of it should be. In many ways, it hasn't changed a huge amount since you were here, regardless whether you left 5 years ago or 50 years ago. But at the same time, it's changed to the point where in some ways it's probably unrecognisable. Things are being adapted, things are being changed, things are being added all the time. And the thing I want to show you next is one of our newest additions to the suite of buildings and places that we have at UEA. Back in 2019, the University of East Anglia opened one of its newest buildings, the new Science Building. It was opened by Dr. Jane Goodall. She was here and she was saying how wonderful it is to engage with such a wide audience and how we are all working together to try and make the world a more cohesive place. She did that by pant hooting, which is a chimpanzee alarm call and a greeting call. And she did it alongside our Vice-Chancellor. It was something to behold. But we're coming up to the new science building now, and it is incredible. Say, opened in 2019 and costing £30 million, we wanted to invest even more in science. But more than that, we wanted to invest in science and make it collaborative. We wanted to make it multidisciplinary, and this building is great for that. It's got 8 massive seminar rooms and 10 huge teaching labs. I say huge. It's geological time periods across one end of the teaching lab to the other. This really is a phenomenal place, and you can see it on my left, so you're right here, this big, beautiful building here. And there's a slight irony now, because not long after we opened the building in 2019, we stopped teaching in it. Obviously, the pandemic hit, but that didn't stop the building being used, because UEA then did what it does best. It did different. And when the pandemic struck, and so many parts of society closed down and, quite rightly so, sheltered, so many from across UEA jumped forward. And this building became industrial. There was a whole army of volunteers, of technicians, of ground staff, of estates, of academics and admin staff all working together. And over nearly 1,000 hours of contribution, at least 4,000 litres, or approximately 4,000 litres of hand sanitizer was made, which went right across the region, to hospitals, to health outlets, to health and social places like GPs. And as someone who was here and witnessed that happening, it was iconic and emotional. It really was. At the same time, we had lots of other work going on. We had teams working day and night, literally working day and night, to help print and develop new types of mask. We had those who were working with different stakeholders across the region, bringing local business holders with distributors, working together to try and get these products and these essential things, everything from PPE right through to the hand gel, to the people who need it most. And that really struck me, and it sounds cliche, and I'm meant to be giving a fun, engaging talk tonight, but that really opened my eyes as to what UEA is about. And as Fiona said earlier, I'm still pretty much the new boy here. But seeing UEA step up last year was amazing. It really was. And yes, they spent £30 million in a building, but it was more than that. The building's just bricks and mortar, maybe some glass. But actually what goes on in these buildings is what defines UEA. And any good university is only as good as those that work and live within the walls, within the grounds. And we couldn't do any bloody better. We really couldn't. And I hope that's something that's carried on since you were here, whether you left 2 years ago, 20 years ago, or even longer. But to see that across the last several months has been truly awe-inspiring. And that's something we're also seeing in terms of more of the research that's going on right now. So we have other academics, such as Professor Jenny Barclay and her team, who have been working with volcanoes for a long time now. And this is why it's so good. This is the sort of research that goes on here. Jenny and her team have worked across the world, focusing on places such as Montserrat. And having done my PhD in the Caribbean, I lived on an island called Nevis, next to Montserrat. And you could still see the devastation if you visited there, and just how iconic and devastating it was. But Jenny's brilliant, because her work, for the sake of the work, is pure in that what she does is amazing to the study of volcanoes. But more than that, she has helped coordinate this project, this multidisciplinary project across the university, to work with those in creative writing, across the English literature groups, right through to international development, to make sure that their work is applicable for those people who are living in these regions where volcanoes are active and devastating, have the best chance of not only surviving them in the short term, but actually surviving and thriving in the long term as well. And what more prescient time than now, when we've got such devastation up in Iceland, but also even more recently down in Goma in the Democratic Republic of Congo, for example. So you never quite know when or how or why your work might be applicable, but as ever, thinking outside the box and thinking differently is something that UEA does very, very well. Now, I don't know how long we've been talking, but two things. My throat's getting very dry, and we are coming towards the end. So I'm going to be heading back to the theatre, the lecture theatre, LT1, in a little while with Fiona, and we will be answering questions that you have. So think of any questions you have. Tell me about some of your favourite memories. We are on Twitter this evening, and I think maybe Facebook. Oh, it's 7 o'clock now. I haven't got my glasses on, so I can't really see what's going on over there. We are on social media, so send us some photos in that you've got. Tell us some of your stories. Tell us what you missed. Tell us what the nicest stuff you remember, or why it was important to you to be from UEA at some point, because it'll be great to hear that as well. As I said, I think having the opportunity to be at a university, any university, that engages with science is absolutely paramount. I have quite a few bees in my bonnet. They're not rare bees, don't worry, they're not upsetting anyone within the ecology department, but one of the biggest bees in my bonnet is those who say science communication and science engagement is twee, it's nice, it's an add-on. We need to shift away from that and go away from this idea that it's something that we can do to waste a bit of time, or it's nice to do if you don't do research, for example. We've shown across the last 12 months in the UK and across the world that you can't ignore science. You may not understand how a universe is created, and you may not understand why a chimpanzee has larger testicles than a gorilla, for example. However, you can't get away from science entirely. Science is there for all of us, and it impacts us. At a time when political instability and political trust is pretty low in many of us, our trust in science needs to be higher. And in order to do that, we need to understand science better. And yes, part of that is with the audience, but a massive part of that is with us, the scientific community. We need to be better at engaging. We need to do better. So we do different here, but we need to do better. And we're doing that, I think, I hope. By bringing different people in, from kids learning about dissections to those of our members of staff who are setting up their own projects to engage audiences more. We're getting there. I've forgotten where I'm going because I don't always know my way around the campus. We're going to go up here. See, you could have had a really boring lecture today, whether I stood behind a lectern and had all my notes. But how rubbish would that have been? At least you sat at home and you can have a beer if you need tonight, or a G&T. And I'm hoping that as we walk around the buildings, this iconic infrastructure and the iconic architecture we have here is eliciting some sort of response. Some of you will love it, some of you will hate it, but either way, this is where good science gets done. Something that's happened recently that we're talking a lot about on social media is the publish or perish idea. And it's something that's affecting and upsetting a lot of people, and rightly so. We're talking about mental health in a way that we've never done before. But something we do at UEA, which I think is amazing, which should be done right across the board, is we celebrate all those in science. Anyone who's here, anyone who's working within these walls, whether you're a student, professor, or anything in between, you have something to contribute. And that is amazing. And that's why great science gets done here, because we celebrate the diversity of scientists, of the scientific community that we have. We do different. Now, as I said, I'm home for just a few days, visiting my family. And this morning, for those of you who remember being in the region and watching local news when you weren't recovering from the night out before at the Union, you may remember Look East. So I was working very hard this morning with one of their amazing news journalists, Mike Liggins, and we were out in Hickling Broad, one of the wonderful broads that we have in Norfolk. And Mike and I, cameraman Sean, we're talking about getting people involved. So at the moment, Springwatch is filming in Norfolk, and we were talking about how important it is to engage with the natural world, how new research is coming out all the time to see why it's so important, both physically and mentally, to have a connection with nature. And something I'm seeing more and more is that more and more people every day, it seems, want to engage not only just with nature, my area of science, but science as a whole. So when I started this talk, I told you what the stats were from 2019. And overall, although 51% of the British population in 2019 felt confident with science, only 15% said they trusted in science. Had a piece of research published last year, that number had jumped to 37%. Doesn't sound like much, we've got a long way to go. But it's doubled, it's more than doubled, so more than doubled within a year. At a time when information is so up and down, we've shown that public trust can increase, and that's amazing. Imagine if this time next year we increase it to 45%, and 2 or 3 years' time we get towards that 80, 90%. We've shown that with a greater trust and a greater understanding in science, UEA can contribute to this global machine that's helping people understand the world around them that little bit better. And you've contributed to that. So if you've listened to my wafflings and my ramblings and you still think that science is just for scientists, fine. But if you're one of those enlightened souls amongst us that realizes and absolutely firmly believes that science is there for the very youngest to the very oldest, from the most educated to the least educated in society. It doesn't matter who you are, male, female, boy, girl, black, white, rich, poor. Science is for all of us. And the sooner we embrace that, the better our society will be for all of us. Here I am.
Welcome back.
Thanks.
It's good to see you. I'm glad you managed to find your way back.
Only got lost once. I do have something to read. Because I haven't got my glasses on, I'm going to have to really squint. So I do need to say that, yes, this is a wonderful opportunity to be here this evening and to actually quite nicely walk around in quite an informal style. But as ever, there is a serious element to this. So from coronavirus to climate change, UEA's research is having a real impact. Who am I looking at? There. So from coronavirus to climate change, UEA's research is having a real impact that is transforming lives around the world. And you could have a real impact too by supporting UEA's Difference campaign with a donation. Your gift could help us prevent the devastating impacts of climate change, help find new and innovative cures for childhood bone cancer, for example, or support a student through financial difficulty. If you want to find out more, then please visit www.uea.ac.uk/difference. And I don't feel bad saying that, because those of us who've been to UEA, those of us who've been to any university, are privileged. We've had a wonderful opportunity that so few get. And if we are in a position to help out those who haven't had that chance yet, and to help out those who are doing research to benefit the lives of others around the world, then I think we should.
So it's good to have you back. I was worried for a second that you might not actually make it back.
Anyone's.
Having explored the far corners of the world.
It was quite an adventure, actually. It was quite good fun.
So what was the highlight for you walking around the campus this evening? At least it didn't rain.
That's one highlight. Also to see not how busy it is, but to see people back, to see students back playing football, and to see them cooking in the ziggurats. And it's quite hard to hide in there sometimes. So just seeing life carrying on, say as normal, there is no normal right now. But to walk around and see people enjoying themselves and having fun is really reassuring.
Yes, and of course the campus is a bit quieter than it would normally be in pre-pandemic times, let's say.
Absolutely. I think it probably helped our little walk and talk this evening. It might have been slightly more difficult on a normal year.
Yes, and I saw the cars. So, well, I think you made it look effortless, actually. I know it takes a lot of skill to walk around and talk like that for that long as well. So that was really brilliant. So Penny H says, Ben has such enthusiasm and is very inspiring. And I think that is certainly something that came through as well. So I just wondered if you could just tell us a little bit about some of the work that you're doing at the moment as well. So I know you've got a new book series out. So could you tell us a little bit about
I do,
the Extinct
yeah.
series?
So I've actually, first of all, I've just finished teaching for this year's block. So I've had a wonderful group of first years this year, which I've absolutely loved teaching, if any are listening or watching. And we finished, actually, by doing a live stream dissection of a dolphin this year with Zoological Society of London. So that was great fun, actually, and teaching has been difficult but fun this year, so I've actually really enjoyed it. But I do have a new series of books that have just come out called Extinct. It's looking at the mass extinctions through the history of the Earth, and they're for young readers, 9 and up, and I've kind of aimed them at university level, but for kids. We can make them accessible, we'll make them engaging, because I love this idea that you can throw heavy science to a young audience from a very early age without dumbing it down. If we have to dumb it down, we've done things wrong there. So yeah, a new series of books is now out. The first 3 of 8 came out a couple of weeks ago. And I've got a couple of new TV projects and radio projects that I can't talk about yet.
Oh no, next time maybe.
Next time. I'm really excited to talk about 2 or 3. I'll be back on screen not too far away, hopefully, with an old friend of mine exploring again.
Excellent.
That's as much as I can say right now.
I'm sure you'll tease us on Twitter as well about
completely.
that. So we've got the first question for you from the audience. So how do you communicate more tricky science subjects? What are your tips to do that? How do you make the complex come alive for us?
I mean, tricky science, in my mind, can either be socially tricky. So one for me is, it's almost as a throwaway comment, say we dissect animals in front of massive audiences. So to have 1,000 people from the public out looking at a cheetah being dissected, or an ostrich or an alligator, can be really difficult. I think the way we do that is by being very open, very honest and transparent. And I think that's the same across any area of science. And there are tricks to that. You don't give the name away, for example, and you're very open at the front at the start and say, this is why we're doing this is for a legitimate reason. I think that works very well. I also think in terms of technically difficult science, if you understand your science, you can convey that to any audience. So before I used to teach here, unfortunately, I used to get my third-year undergraduates live streaming their content to primary school kids. They always thought it was a joke, but if you can't explain your science to a young audience, for example, you're doing things wrong. And I love this idea that we do elevation or elevator pitches, and we do soapbox science, which is a group in the UK. And if you can convey your science to anyone in 2 minutes, you might do a thesis for your PhD that lasts 4 or 5 years. If you can't tell somebody that, if you meet them in a bar or in a restaurant or in a library, for example, you need to up your game. So it's practice, really.
Yes, and I remember trying to explain what I did for my PhD to my mum. That was a good test.
I want to say mums and dads are great. They want to listen, they want to be there, but they haven't got the expertise in your particular area usually. They're a captive audience. So practice on mum and dad, I think is a good one.
So what career options are available to you if you love science communication?
I mean, you just name it, it's out there. I mean, between you and I, we can probably name easily 100 different career areas you want to do. And I've met people who spent decades in the tropics catching tiny, what we call sweat bees. I'm not quite sure what group they are. I'm sure one of our bee researchers or invertebrate researchers would know. But sweat bees, and they used to catch them, put them in tiny little tubes and paint numbers on their back. And you're talking things that were only 4 or 5 millimeters in length in the middle of a jungle, and then they would go and try and catch them kilometers away. And I remember thinking, as a recent graduate, thinking I didn't know that job existed. Yet alone, all the different things out there. It's everything from looking at robots in space. I've got friends who look at bone density of fish in space and to extrapolate that with us, right through to innovative ways of doing eye care and looking at dinosaurs. I mean, you name it. If you name it, you can probably do it in science. And that's what's wonderful about science. There are very few occasions where I meet a colleague within science that does the same job as me. And I hope many of us can say the same. That's the same across the STEM subjects, that there are so many different niche areas in which one can work. It's getting out and exploring. I think that's really important as well. Don't get stuck with the first thing you do if it doesn't float your boat or fire your lights off every time. I think there's a lot of things out there.
Yeah, I think people think careers are quite linear, but I think those of us a bit longer in our careers know that it's a pretty windy path to end up where you end up, yes. So what do you do if someone won't listen to facts? For example, anti-vaxxers. How do you persuade and with science communication?
That's a really good question. I knew that would come up, and I don't have an answer that probably makes everybody happy with that. You're not going to convince everybody. And that old adage that you can please some of the people some of the time, but whatever it is true. I also, however, think it's not worth getting into a massive slanging match with people regularly. I mean, I do occasionally, I know I do, I'm quite vocal on social media. However, I think if you know the cause is lost, you have to ask yourself, why do you want to persuade that person? And what could you do in terms of your energy? And we're all very tired at the moment, and most academics are most of the time. I don't really want to waste my time with someone I know who fundamentally doesn't want to listen, doesn't want to agree. And if their whole precept is to not accept fact and use it as a belief, then I'm not going to change them. However, I might be able, by engaging with them, help start a conversation or a narrative with others who are doubting. So I have used that as a springboard. If I've got someone who completely disagrees with me fundamentally, whether it's creationism or anti-vaxxers, I'll use that as an opportunity to engage with people who might be on the periphery. So I don't expect to change him or her every time, but there might be unknown benefits of others out there.
Yeah, so some people that might be just sort of wavering a little bit and you can convince them one way or the other. So I've got another question come in. So do you think more can be done to train scientists to engage effectively with the public?
Absolutely. And I think I nearly said even in my short time in science, it's changed. It is changing all the time. And even across the last 5, 10, 15 years, I'm seeing so many more groups setting up opportunities to engage with the public and to train others. And whether it's, as I say, the Youth STEM Awards, or whether it's science festivals, or people like No who are doing their own podcasts, they're all set up off the back of people who want to make a difference. There's Soapbox Science, where women in science around the UK literally stand on a box in the middle of the street and talk about their subject. There are so many opportunities, and we're also seeing it filter down into universities where we've got an amazing group here led by Kay Yeoman and Tony and the rest of the team there who are doing science engagement modules. I know we have the same thing across environmental sciences as well. So we're actually training students, we're teaching them the basics and some of the fundamentals of science communication, science engagement, and then giving them or helping them find the opportunities to get out there and become better scientists and better communicators. As well as helping others understand that science, I think fundamentally it makes you a better scientist as well. If you can convey your science and that passion and the understanding that you get from your science, it's more fulfilling. I firmly believe that. But yeah, it's changing for the better, and we're seeing it both in the real world, opportunities increasing, and within the university setting itself. We're training our students, I think, much better than we did 5 years ago even.
Yes, and I know certainly in some of the programmes we've been experimenting with teaching students how to use infographics to explain their research, and obviously podcasts have become much more popular as well. So it's using lots of different media as well is really exciting and experimenting, I think.
Absolutely. I mean, there are very few, I'll be careful what I say now, very few fundamentally wrong ways to engage science if that's what you want to do. I mean, it's hard to mess it up. I mean, it might not be absolutely tailored and beautiful and polished, but not everybody's Attenborough. I mean, the thing that I just did, I walked around and got lost. I forgot what I was talking about at one point, and I actually wrote things on my hand so that I remember some certain names. I couldn't remember Sir Norman Foster a couple of times. It's okay to do that. You're not all perfect. None of us are. But I also think what you said is really important there. It's never been easier to use the technology available. And I think also, as you said, working across boundaries, interdisciplinary work is so important. So whether we work with the English department, we've got a creative writing department here. It's amazing to think that you can convey your very heavy science into a piece of literature, or it might be through dance, or it might be looking with the sports facilities here and combining that with science. I think to have this idea that we're more collaborative with better access to better tech, there's never been a better time to engage with science.
Yeah, and I think, being in a university as well is a really safe space to experiment while you're learning as well, with different techniques. So I've got another question come in. Do you think more can be done by universities to reach school children during careers advice sessions to encourage them into university?
Absolutely. I'll always say there's more to be done because there's more that needs to be done. And universities are doing a great job. And I know, again, for example, that we have a huge outreach project here that works with both deprived areas, both inner city and more rural areas as well, to really hopefully and successfully engage with kids from all different backgrounds, but also different ages and different levels within their school career and educational career as well. But there's always more that needs to be done. Yeah,
that seems to be a passion of yours, though, as well as engaging children and getting them to think about
Absolutely. And I think by the time you get to university, that's great, but we shouldn't start really engaging students with science when you get to university, and we don't do that. But I think we need to be much better at that and engaging young people with science. And we see this right through CBBS and CBBC, and right from things like Octonauts, right through to books that are coming out. We've got academics here, Harriet Jones, for example, who is publishing books on microbiology for very young readers. The opportunity to do that is something that's absolutely amazing. Of course, you want to engage 4 or 5 years, kids at 4 or 5 years old, with things like paramecium and these wonderful things that even I don't understand. But if you engage them at a young audience and get them used to feeling capable and able to engage with some of these hard topics, then by the time they're our age, then yeah, they'll be much better. However, I will always say more can be done. Until every kid out there feels they have an equal opportunity to get into science, we need to do more. Yes, as simple as that.
I've always been amazed as well at how many dinosaur names they can kind of trot off the tongue.
Absolutely. and kids want to learn. Kids want to learn. They want to show off to their parents, their friends, their grandparents how much they know. And to say they're like little sponges, I think is wrong, because they're not passive. They're like these little Pac-Man things that are just constantly eating up information. They want to sort of demonstrate just how clever they are. Let's use that and really capacity build. I think that's really important, that we capacity build and create this sense of stewardship within young scientists. They are young scientists. Anyone who says you have to have a PhD to be a scientist, just a bit egotistical, really. The moment you engage with science and you think science is cool, that's it. And that's another thing. We don't need to be cool within science. I think we need to own this sense of geeky nerdiness. I'm a massive geek, completely.
Be proud, yes.
Geeky and proud, absolutely. And so is Attenborough, and so is Jane Goodall, and so Backshaw, and some of the people I respect the most. Angela Catchwer and Chris Jackson. These are iconic, amazing people who are, to me, far more impressive than any sports personality or singer out there. And in my mind, rightly so. So if you are young and geeky and nerdy and you think that might be a bad thing, us geeks have more fun.
Definitely. So do you have any tips for engaging with the public online in particular?
Yep, be humble. Don't think you're better because you're a scientist. And that's not saying that reflects on the person, but we often speak, it's so easy to try and, what's the equivalent of mansplaining, like science-splain to someone? It's like, do you know what a particle is? We slip into that very, very quickly, I think. And I do it. We all do it. So remember that you're talking to people who want to learn. And be patient, because not everybody gets stuff very early on. I am infamously bad at understanding anything to do with space. And again, I'll talk about Mark Thompson there. Poor Mark must be at his wit's end with trying to explain to me the different things of space. I just don't understand.
I've enjoyed your biology physics arguments.
We have lots. But the nice thing is we have this patience, and that we can have that. And I think if anybody wants to learn, it's our responsibility to take the time to show them that, to help them understand. And the way that you understand something as a scientist might not be the best way for somebody else to understand something as a non-scientist, or as somebody from a different scientific sphere. So you might literally have to get the blue Smarties out to help explain how viruses work, for example, or you might have to make some cardboard cutouts to explain how ecology works or how a supernova works. Please, Mark. So try different ways and just be patient.
Okay, we've got a question from Kate. She says, as a non-scientist who needs to communicate and market the work of scientists to lay audiences, what are your tips for drawing people in to listen in the first place?
I don't like the idea that science is sexy. We don't need to make science sexy, first of all. We don't need to jazz it up or rip our tops off to chase animals, and that's not being derogatory to anyone who does do that. But I think science is exciting enough. You are telling a story, and actually, as someone who's worked quite a lot with bioanthropology, our species, Homo sapiens, are famously storytellers. We have wonderful rock art and beautiful statues and flutes going back tens of thousands of years, if not further, hundreds of thousands of years sometimes. Our species has partly evolved through its cultural ability and desire and need to tell stories. The greatest story out there is science. It explains everything, as I said earlier, from the creation of the universe to why blue is the hardest pigment to make naturally within the natural world. It explains all that. So we need to tap into a way of giving narrative to science. And I think the moment we do that, the moment we make it more relatable, more accessible, I think that's where we have a really good opportunity to make it more relevant, to make it more interesting. It might be the most relevant thing to your life ever, but if you don't find it interesting, if we don't find a hook that brings you in and makes you want to listen and makes you want to care, then we've lost you. So when I do my media work, we always
ask a couple of questions. It's who cares, why now? And that makes it relevant. So who cares that we've got this wonderful story about bats with coronavirus? In fact, 3 years ago, I wouldn't have mentioned that probably. It would have been another disease and another animal, hey-ho. It's relevant right now because it's relevant to you, to me, to everybody out there, because there's a relevance, there's a time, there's a link. Who cares? I mean, we all care. Why would you care? And that's the moment you can do that. And some areas are much easier than others, but I think we have to find those hooks and provide that narrative. It's not easy. It's really not easy, but I think it's when you find that connection with your audience, and it is an audience, whether you're reading a journal article or watching David on TV, or whether you're reading a book for kids, whatever, or at a science festival, you always have an audience. And I think it doesn't detract from the science to think of the audience out there, but I think we have to think of a way that we engage, not entertain necessarily, but engage with them. And science
and find their so what, their why.
Yeah.
Yes,
So why now and who cares? You have to find a way, and you're not every single person is going to care about every single piece of science, but then you've got to find your way of engaging with that particular audience. And I know people who worked for conservation organisations, very heavy conservation organisations, for example, in the UK, who've done burlesque nights. Because it links things that your demographic likes. It doesn't work for everybody. I can't see certain groups doing that, for example. I don't know why that popped into my head then. Right through to, as I say, to doing live stream dissections. It's not everything works in the right place at the same time, but there are different ways of engaging it. And you can be playful, you can be creative. Science isn't dry. We all know that you and I both work within the STEM subjects. It's fascinating. It drives us. We don't do it for the money. We definitely don't. And we don't do it for the adulation because there isn't very much at all. We do it because we're passionate about our subjects. And I think if we can all tap into that, we can share that. And that's the way to target your audience there, your wider public.
Okay, I've got another question for you. So what is your favourite or most memorable Cycom story?
My most memorable Cycom story.
Or favourite?
Oh, whoa. Probably. Oh. Do you know, I mean, I've mentioned it a couple of times now, but I think it's either the dissection that I did last year with Dr. Jess French, who's a very good friend and a vet from the area, and we did this alligator dissection online for Norwich Science Festival. And we had this beautiful alligator that had sadly passed away from a British zoo. We explained that at the start. We had people from all around the world live streaming or watching whilst we live streamed, and we found eggs inside this female that was at least 70 to 80 years old. And we didn't know there were eggs in there. We actually got her to bellow by looking and working with the vocal cords. And we talked about ecology, we talked about conservation, and the feedback we got from that was absolutely amazing. I think that was one. One of the nicest that I've ever had was with Jane Goodall a couple of years ago at the, again, Norwich Science Festival. And you were there, weren't you? But
yes.
We were in the cathedral, and it was this wonderful opportunity. And again, you don't necessarily think, why do you have a science festival in a cathedral? But I think, again, with the previous question, you find a way of making things more interesting. What more beautiful setting could you possibly want than this big, beautiful building there from, I think it's 1150, whenever it is, and have someone in there to talk about her work. And I remember you could have heard a pin drop that evening, and to talk with Jane, and I've known Jane for 20 odd years now, but to get some of these intimate stories about why she does what she does, and some of her most iconic moments was really special for me, actually. And I think everybody there, I've spoken to a lot of people since, and a lot of people still talk about how wonderful that evening was.
Yeah, it's a very special venue, the cathedral, yeah. So this is now our last question that we've got time for this evening. So as a biologist, how do you feel about the threats that we impose on species by trying to build roads through their habitat or other things like that?
Well, that's very relevant to where we are in Norfolk right now. There's a lot of work going on there. So there is a roadway that is being planned for just outside Norwich. I would always say ignore science at your peril. And I think there's a real lesson there. We have shown that it's infringing on areas that there are habitats for endangered and vulnerable species. There are alternatives being given, and whether that's HS2 or local roads in the Norfolk area or things going through the Amazon, I think there are problems with all these things. And that's not to say we can't stand in the way of progress. No one's saying you can't develop. We're in a developing world, and we're a species that's constantly striving forwards. You can't ignore the science, though, and I think that's really important. We're seeing, I guess, going full circle, and I'm talking about the pandemic, about 60% of the diseases that we have within humans are zoonotic, so originating at some point from non-human species of animals. About 75% of newly emerging infectious diseases right now are zoonotic in their origin. So we're seeing a shift. We're seeing a much higher increase in zoonotic diseases getting into humans, and at the same time, that links into massive habitat destruction, into conversion of habitat all around the world. We're seeing species being driven into extinction. There's at least 1 million species threatened with extinction right now, and again, going back to these science books that I've written for kids, we've had at least 5, maybe as many as 20 mass extinction events through the history of the Earth. This is the first one that's being caused by a single species, by us. And if we think that we're so special that we're outside that sphere of biodiversity, then that's going to come back and bite us. I think if you take nothing else away from this evening, then take away that A, science is for all of us, but also B, we're part of a global ecosystem. We're not separate from that. We have the opportunity to make a real difference, and every single person can make a difference. It's very easy to say, I'm just one person, or, well, China, America, India, Britain, you would name a country, doesn't matter who you name, they're always going to do worse than you as an individual. They're doing worse than me. They might be, but until you make a difference, until you try and help, nothing will ever get changed. And as Jane Goodall, as David Attenborough, as all these people that we can name again and again and again, one person can make a difference, and you never know who you're going to speak to. So unless we try, nothing will ever happen. So yeah, I think we have to start thinking more collaboratively, more holistically, as much of the research I've been talking about this evening, by transcending these traditional fields, not just working in bio or physics or pharmacy, whatever, by working across the borders, the boundaries, we'll get a lot more done. And I think the same goes for our relationship with the natural world as well. The moment we realize we're part of it, rather than it's there to serve us, we'll have a much less bleak future.
Okay, so that's a nice note to end on. So yes, there is still hope, and we can make a difference, and we should try to make a difference as individuals and collectively. So that's a really nice message to end on. So thank you, Ben. Really enjoyed this evening, and your intrepid exploration of the campus. That was really good fun to watch. I certainly enjoyed it, and it's been a pleasure to speak with you this evening. So thank you very much for giving up your time and doing your first London lecture and our last of this current series of spring lectures.
Well, thanks for having me. I'm sure I'll be back at some point, and it was great. And thank you for listening this evening. This evening couldn't have been done without yourself, Marissa, the guys from Norwich live streaming services, Rachel, Anna, and everyone else here. So a lot of work has gone into this evening. So
yes.
Thank you, everyone.
A fantastic team. Thank you, everybody.